Howdy, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we're brought to you by a few key sponsors: Cryptic for all your outdoor clothing needs, Mount Up Fitness if you're looking to get in a little better shape to go further and farther on your trap lines, and Trapline Beard Oil. So, as always, go check out the promo codes that are in the show notes. It helps the show out, helps our sponsors out, and gets you some pretty cool discounts on some awesome things. Now, my guest today is somebody that I've been, well, frankly, since I started this podcast over a year ago, been excited to chat with, and we finally able to make it happen. A Minnesota native who runs 330 Maniac, or that's what he's better known as. And I think many people on this show listening will know him as 330 Maniac. His YouTube videos have helped me over the years as I've gotten into water trapping. And I'm just excited to be chatting with him. So Scott Mackner, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Now, Scott, so the question I start out with for everybody on this show is I need you to reach into your memory piggy bank and pull out what your first core memory of ever being exposed to trapping was.
Oh, man. Thinking back, I guess my oldest memory of trapping would be, with my dad. We used to trap, and I don't know, the muskrats have kind of disappeared from there, but there's a small creek just down from where I live. And I remember, my dad, we used to pad trap muskrats, in the fall, and he had a broom and he wired like a coat hook hanger to the end. And it was always my job. Like if we got to a muskrat pad and the trap was gone, there's a muskrat down there. It was my job to take the hook, and reach down the water, hook that trap and pull it up. And I almost felt like I was fishing and trapping at the same time. And, I couldn't, I'm guessing I must have been around 8 or 9 years old, somewhere around there. But when I think back into my first memories of trapping, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
So your dad was a trapper then?
Yes, my dad and my grandpa were both trappers.
Okay. So a lineage of trapping then. So, was your dad kind of trapping during the fur boom of the 80s then? I mean, I'm just kind of guessing, or
yeah.
Was it a hobby thing for your family forever, or was it like a sustenance thing?
I believe it was more of a sustenance thing because, I actually have quite a few old Polaroids of my mom and my dad. Or my mom, and my dad and my grandpa back in, it literally says, 77, 78, 79, back in those days when fur was worth a lot of money, and they had a lot of fox. And, my dad used to talk about the days where foxes was $100 and coon were worth 65. And, I just, you think about those prices nowadays. Oh my gosh, guy can make a living doing it,
Well, that's awesome. So then as a young kid being exposed to that from your dad and your granddad, was the hook set early on then? Like when you had that kind of first memory of where you're kind of half fishing, half trapping for getting muskrats out, was it something that you were like, this is something I want to do for the rest of my life? Or was it, just kind of another thing to do as a kid?
No, I believe I was hooked. I've been hooked from an early age. I got, like I said, I have that memory, a lot of memories of my dad. Literally, he would pull me out of school and in 5th or 6th grade down here. And it would just, they'd be like, hey, your dad's here to pick you up. Oh, okay. And I'd go outside and he's like, oh, you're going to help me check muskrat traps this afternoon, and just, and we used to duck hunt and all that stuff, and everything fell in line with trapping. And I absolutely fell in love with trapping. And I never thought I would get tired of it, and I just don't see it happening until I can't do it anymore,
And this was all in Minnesota?
Yep, this is all in Minnesota.
I grew up very urban. To think back to my elementary school days, had someone I known been pulled out of school to go check muskrat traps, I would have been scratching my head, what is going on here? I mean, was that pretty normal for the area you were in, or where you had other kids asking what are you getting out of? What did you go catch? What are you doing?
It wasn't, I don't think it was more normal for the trapping, but it seemed like other things, duck hunting, deer season. It was almost like it's almost like the teachers expected half the kids to be gone, the Monday and Tuesday of opener of rifle season, or the Monday, Tuesday of duck opener, because my dad always pulled us out of school, so we had 4 days of duck hunting. He would literally tell the principal, hey, he won't be there Monday, Tuesday, he's duck hunting, and it was just kind of, the thing. Everybody did it,
And you kind of said that the trapping bled into everything. So it sounds like you guys were a very well-rounded outdoor family, from duck hunting, deer hunting, trapping. You mentioned like the fur prices were better, so trapping was a bit of a sustenance thing, but like what kept that going? Like, was there like conservation aspects? Like, I mean, I know you're a big fisherman. Like, were there elements of wanting to make better fishing habitat that kept you trapping? Like, as you kind of grew out of adolescence and fur prices dropped, like what was the main motivator for you?
I really just enjoyed the outdoors, and trapping, brought back a lot of memories of my dad and my grandpa and all the good times I had doing that. And just, I would say challenging myself and just being out in nature,
With your youth, did you end up taking a break from trapping at all? Like
I
before
took,
kind of coming back to it as an adult, I guess is the best way to ask that question.
no. So my dad passed away in 1997. Him and I, I always trapped with him a little bit, I always have, but in the early 90s, I'm going to say 93 to 97, somewhere 93 to 96. We actually trapped a lot. Like we trapped, I mean, we like that one year we trapped like 1,800 muskrats.
Oh,
Yeah, it was, and the funny part is, me, I trap beaver predominantly now. Growing up with my dad would not let me trap beaver unless they were on a pond that was full of muskrat huts.
huh.
So, I always loved trapping beaver, I think because they were such a much bigger critter. But my dad always said, yo, muskrats are the bread and butter because, they're easy to catch and you're going to get numbers of them. So anyway, so my dad, he ended up getting lung cancer and passing away in 1997. And there was like that year, I got kind of mad at the world. I'm glad I didn't sell any traps or anything, but I sold a rifle and a shotgun that we had bought together, just, and then, afterwards I was like, oh, I shouldn't have did that. But I did take a break, that like that year that he passed away, I didn't trap at all. And then the following year I came back kind of full force and just went back with it again because I really missed it, I think it was just tough him, not being around because he was my mentor and he was my trapping partner,
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that. That's terrible, but it does. Those emotions definitely take over, and I can understand the wanting to disassociate with some of those things for a little while. And I'm glad that it was, you came back. Sounds like pretty quickly, at least within a year. But I'm curious too. As a kid, like 1,800 muskrats, like from the beginning, like were you doing like the true soup to nuts? Like how were you handling the furs afterwards? Like, were you like a young kid and your dad handing you a knife, like, let's skin these out? Like, were you selling them green, or what was the case there?
No, we put them all up. And actually we didn't. So we would get home, and also, first of all, we would get to a muskrat pond, and my dad would send me along, I would have 100, 110 conibears, and my job was to set runs all the way around the pond, and he would let me get started for a half hour setting these traps, and then he would go start setting the huts. And, by the time I got back around, he set the huts while I'd run the 110s, and pick up 40 or 50 rats. And we had some really, good catch days. But we would get home, we would skin everything, and we would wrap them all up and put them in like bread sacks. Of what we would do. Like we would do, I can't remember how many we would do in a bread bag, but yeah, we wrapped them all up, rolled them up, put them in bread bags, and we had big cubic freezers that we used to keep venison and stuff in. But yeah, we didn't really put any of them up. We skinned them all, rolled them up, put them in bags, and then right around Christmas time we quit, or when when the snow got too deep and the hut disappeared, whatever. But yeah, and then he would take out a certain amount, every day. It was like, I don't even remember. I just, in my mind, I just remember we had these clips, the wooden clothesline clips, and we had pieces of yarn super glued to all these clips. We had 7 different colors of yarn for you put these rats up tonight, put this color yarn on them, write that down, then you knew what ones to take down. And I used to play hockey a lot, not for school, but with my friends. And I just remember every day, it would be, we'd get out of school or whatever, and he would say, hey, you're not going anywhere until we get these rats put up. And we knocked them out. Yeah. And I remember and I wish I have it somewhere. I literally have the old piece of paper written down with all the numbers of rats on it. Cause it was just over 1,800 muskrats, 69 beaver, some fox and raccoons and stuff. And I had that receipt for the longest time. I just, we averaged like $1.25 a piece on the rats. But it was amazing memory to have. And that was actually, where I bought my shotgun and my rifle. Cause that was the first time he was like, you didn't have to work. I'm keeping, $300 for gas, and we're going to split the rest of this. And, and none of, we always used to borrow shotguns from other people and stuff. And I was the first one to actually have my own rifle and own shotgun. And it was just an amazing time, my life.
Yeah. I mean, 1,800, it's pretty cool. Like, I think about how old were you at that time, do you reckon?
Let me see, you're 78. I was 16 or 17. I was 16. I'd have been 16.
When I think about me as a 16-year-old, and now knowing what I know about the effort it takes to put up fur, and never those numbers, like the amount of grit, like I would imagine me as a 16-year-old, if I was doing that with my dad, I'd be like, I'd much rather be playing hockey or doing something else. But then like having the responsibility and someone over you as a mentor to be like, no, we're doing it. Like, did you hate it a little bit at the time in some of those instances, or were you always pretty much like, yep, this is part of the job, and I had a good attitude about it?
There was some nights where I hated it, where I didn't get to go play hockey until there was an hour left or 45 minutes, until the rink closed. And, he was kind of lenient, sometimes he would let me go a little bit early, but, no, it was, I just thinking back to it, it was an assembly line, I would literally put them on a board, and I had a big spoon, and that's how I would scrape all the fat off of them all. And then I'd give them to my dad, and he would turn them inside out with a hair dryer and make sure they were dried in that manner. And then he would clip them and put them up, and yeah, we just had this wicked assembly line. I got it down to, we were pretty fast at pretty much everything, like I could, at one point I remember, he timed me, I'd skin a muskrat in like 45 seconds, and having, thinking back, and ever since then, the best year I've ever did was, one year I caught 890 muskrats by myself. And just thinking back, oh my gosh, like how did we, I remember the ponds that we trapped back then, now I go to these ponds and they're dry. There's no water left in them, and I can just remember seeing, 100+ rat houses in each one of these ponds. And, yeah, it was, like I said, it was a process, but we got it down pretty good.
Man, I mean, that sounds like a blast to do with your dad. I mean, like you said, I'm sure it was trying at times, but to get that locked down, when you were doing that, and you said earlier, your dad didn't always want you setting for beaver and was kind of strict around it. Do you remember the first time you did catch a beaver, and like what that felt like compared to catching, well, obviously you were stacking muskrats, but like, as a young kid, like what was it like to come up on your first beaver?
Actually, I remember the first two beaver I caught. The first one I caught a nice blanket. I even to the day remember the exact beaver house and where it's at. And I actually just pulled some beaver traps today, like a quarter mile from this. And it's not a pond anymore, it's just a big rushy area. But I remember, I used to go out and I would help my dad. I would find the runs, I'd help him chop them out, and he had 4 or 5 traps to set. and he was setting them, and I was joking around. I'm like, hurry up before I got to start setting. And I was just floored. He's like, well, he's like, you watched me enough. He's like, won't you set that one over there? And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, and sure enough, I set this run up and got there the next day, and had a nice blanket beaver. And I actually took like the bottom tooth out and made a necklace out of it, and all this and that, and it was maybe a couple days later. There was a muskrat pond that had a small bank lodge on it, and we walked by, and it was ice on the pond, but it was wide open for about 10 feet in front of it. And yeah, he said, well, go to the truck and get a couple 330s and set this lodge, so that was the first lodge where he didn't help me do anything. He just trusted me to go over there and set it up, and I did get a nice blanket beaver out of there too, or a nice big beaver, I recall. But I remember both of those very, very clearly.
Yeah. So your dad said, go grab some 330. So I got to ask this question. So having watched your YouTube channel for a number of years now, I've always considered myself to be a pretty strong guy. And when I got into trapping, I was like, I could set these suckers by hand. If Scott can do it, I can set my traps by hand. For those listening who haven't set 330s by hand, like it's a feat of strength. But you obviously weren't doing that as a kid. Did you have setters when you were younger, or were you always just bear pawing it and able to figure out how to do it?
I honestly always set them by hand.
Is there a trick that I'm just missing?
I always tell people you don't have, I don't think you have to be, super strong to do it. I mean, I'm not a big guy. I think it's all about leverage. You got to get right over the top of the trap. I always use this part of my hand right here, get right over the top of that 330 spring and push straight down, and just pretty much use your body weight. And, a lot of it is getting that ring around the center of the trap, it gets hooked up on stuff. But yeah, I think it's just muscle memory and just center of gravity over the top of those springs.
Well, I need to be doing a little bit more practice, because when I'm out and on snow and stuff, I could do it in the garage in a controlled setting and I feel pretty good about myself. And then I get out on something slippery or ice and I'm like, nope, this ain't happening. And I grab a rope.
Oh, it's much easier to do it, when you're up on the ice, or you can get that beaver position in a certain way to use, actually even using the beaver's body itself, to leverage against the trap. Where it is kind of a pain in the butt is this time of year, if I'm out, in the water in front of a beaver lodge, and now I got a big beaver, and now I don't have nothing to put that beaver on. I'll actually put it between my legs and grab it and then use that as leverage, or try to find some sticks along the beaver lodge to use that as leverage. It is way harder to do it in that, manner versus you're up on the ice or something with a nice hard surface area to put the beaver on.
Yeah. It's a feat for sure, but I guess one that takes practice. But nonetheless, with you and your evolution in trapping, most people know you as either a fisherman or a beaverman. I mean, as far as I can tell, and how I view you personally. When did you really kick it up on beavers then? Was that while your dad was still living, or was that kind of later in life then?
That was later in life. I remember that year that we caught all the muskrats and I caught those 69 beaver. I thought I was the king of trapping, because we didn't sell. Actually, we didn't really put any of those beaver up. My mom at the time, there was a mink farm right outside of town that she worked at. So they would let us take all of our beaver out there, because they had a giant walk-in freezer, and there's pallets in there. And I literally put, all 69 of these beaver were stacked on pallets everywhere. And yeah, and we just kept everything there. Yeah, I'm trying to.
Did you end up tanning them or anything, or what was kind of the ultimate end goal when you had those 69 beaver?
I think it was just to catch just to catch numbers. That was in my mind. That was the plan. And we sold, all the wraps were put up. The only thing that wasn't put up, I guess, was the beaver. And we had a couple trucks that we loaded up, with that. And then, like I said, then my dad passed away. And I still did, I still trapped, rats a bit. But, around here, every single lake, pond, slough, there's a beaver lodge on it. I mean, every single one. So I could go, anywhere, and I think I had like 15 330s at the time. But I mean, at all times, basically, I would have them set out somewhere, and I don't know, I just love beaver trapping. Something about, and I use a few H stands, but I mostly use sticks and stuff. And there's just something so great about, I really like I know it's more work. I really love trapping them through the ice, when you can find these banked ends that have no ice over them. You put a trap in there the next day, and the next day you get there and the sticks, were nice and uniformed. Now, there's only one left and it's sideways in the water. So that there's going to be a big beaver, under that ice. It's just, there's just nothing like it.
Yeah. Between that, and I always say on this show, it's the best time machine you can ever hop in to feel like you are, in the 1800s. But, I'm curious because, where I'm at in Idaho, we have healthy beaver numbers, and I can catch a large number of beaver, and it's been fantastic, mostly on the river. Now it seems like, or the perception I have, like just watching your YouTube, it seems like there are beaver everywhere. Like there are lodges everywhere. Like what is, like, I don't know if it's a conservation thing. Like what's with the numbers there? It seems like you have so many. I don't know if you don't have enough trappers or if it's just the fact that they're just doing so well there from the, topography or what it is.
I think, we don't have a lot of trappers right around where I am at. There are trappers around, but the biggest, oh gosh, I'd say the reason there's so many beaver around here is, even though I'm trapping a lot of spots, if you were to pull out like Google Maps and go and look at, the places I've been trapping, and you look back in the, in the woods on all this private land around here, there's twice as many ponds, back in the woods that are loaded with beaver that nobody's ever, most likely nobody's ever tapped into. So bam, you got them kicking out 2-year-olds, and they're literally just coming out of the woodwork everywhere, and I mostly trap the same spots every year. I always trap a few different ones, but looking at, I've been trapping these same spots. I'm 46 now. I've been trapping the same spots for like 30 years, and I can, like, almost all these spots I can go back to the next year, and the beaver lodge is still there. I'll catch, a dozen beaver out of there, or and it's like, how is there, still this many beaver in these ponds? There's never been a shortage, regardless of how many. When I was younger, back in, I'm going to say my mid to late 20s, I trapped a lot. The most I've ever caught in one winter, I caught 467, and that was all on foot, no wheeler, no nothing. And for probably 10 years there, I probably averaged about 350 beaver a winter. And it didn't matter. I would go back, and some of those lodges would be dormant, but I would say 90 to 95% of them would just, like, I never even caught a beaver out of there.
Yeah, that's wild. Again, I'm glad that perception's right, because it seems like every year it's just more. It's like they don't go away, and it's just like they magically reappear. But like you said, I guess a lot of them are getting kicked over from private land, and it's really cool because you get the reps and you get to be able to do all these great things. And like up here where we're at, like, you got to be a little cautious, right? Because trap them out, there's not going to be anything left because it's just finite. Yeah. But that's really cool that's an area where it's almost like a constant feeder.
It is. I get a lot of people commenting. They'll comment in my videos. Nobody knows what the population is around here, but I try to explain it best. They're like, they're going to be extinct, or some people are like, they are so rare. Like, how are you able to even trap beaver? They don't know. But last year the local game warden told me that the local DNR office here got 389 calls from people around here. There's a lot of lakes around here. You know, you got people with really expensive lake houses, and all of a sudden they wake up one morning and their beautiful willow tree in their front lawn is chewed down, you know, or been chewing on. And so anytime that happens, naturally they're going to call the DNR office and say, hey, you know, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do about this? And usually they call me, you know, or they'll give them my number. But yeah, they always have well over 300 calls every year about nuisance beaver.
Yeah, you know, again, I got started later in life in trapping, but even where we're at, like we have 80 miles of dirt road leading to our little town up here in the mountains. And, you know, there's been instances in the past where beaver, you know, will flood the one road in and out, cause millions of dollars of damage, or, you know, clog our fish ladder right here at the dam and block any sort of trout or salmon coming in and out. And that makes the otters happy, but not the fish people.
Sure.
And it's always a big balance, but you don't, unless you're trapping or you're the one who's the, you know, victim of the beaver, you know, the one with the expensive lake house and your willow trees getting chewed down, like you don't really know. I didn't know. But then once that world's open to you, you do realize that, wow, like these critters are pretty amazing, A, and B, like there's a pretty good number of them.
Sure. Yeah, I've had over the years, I've had a couple encounters with people kind of almost like karma, you know, that they don't want you trapping beaver, you know. I don't know. Maybe like 20 years ago, I was trapping some beaver at this place, and I mean, the job I had at the time wasn't paying very much, and I was actually making good money off trapping beaver. But I showed up, you know, here, as long as you can access a lake or a river or anything from private property, or here, I don't know if you have road right of way, you know, where you're at, but the majority of the lakes and rivers around here, you have 75 feet from the center line of the road out to the edge of the road. So as long as you can access that waterway, you can trap anywhere on the lake you want. You just cannot touch the shoreline. So if there's a beaver house out on the lake, you can go out there and trap these beaver. Well, I had set up a beaver lodge, and it was a really, really good lodge. I was super excited to get back to my car, and this gentleman was upset that I was trapping the beaver. His wife liked them and this and that. And I just said, sorry, man. I'm like, I need to get some Christmas money for my kids. And he, you know, and he's like, oh, what do you think the beaver are worth? And I'm like, you know, I'm getting $30 a piece, and there's probably 10 of them in there. And he says, tell you what, if you go pull your traps, I'll give you $300 in cash right now. Done. Gave me $300. Went and pulled my traps. Next spring, you know, first week of April, I get a call from this guy, and this guy's like, oh, the beaver, you know, we've never had a problem with them. They're cutting all my trees down on my point, because he was on a, you know, nice expensive lake house. And I laughed because I got to where the road turned. I'm like, no way. Sure enough, I pull up to his house, and it's the same guy that paid me to not trap him. And he recognized me right away, you know, and I was charging him $50 a beaver to come remove them. So he was like, $300 I gave you. Can that be like a down payment? I'm like, no. So I ended up catching 9 beaver out of there, and he paid me an additional $450. And he was like, gosh, he's like, you know, we love the beaver, but we had no idea how destructive they were. I said, yeah, you know, you're like, they're not hurting your land. I said, but down the river, they're cutting somebody's trees down, you know. And I've got a few stories like that where it's kind of karma. People are like, I don't want this, you know, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, the beaver dropped a tree on my garage, you know, type of stuff.
Yeah, it's easy to disassociate until it affects you. That's a really good story, actually. I'm sure that had to have been one of your probably favorite moments of walking up and recognizing him, and, you know, getting to double tip a little bit.
Yeah, I was so giddy. I'm like, oh boy, I can't wait to see this guy, you know. And when he seen me, he just started smiling and shaking his head like, oh boy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it takes that education, though. I think that's like probably universal, right? Especially when it comes to predators. Like up here where I'm at, like I was out pulling all my wolf traps today, and, you know, we have a big wolf problem. But as you know, it's a very sensitive topic, especially with people who aren't living in this area per se, or are not affected or don't see the damage caused on a daily basis. But then you bring someone out and you show them like piles of ungulates that are scattered along the road on a 30-mile stretch. It's like not even fully eaten, just picked at, just sport killed. And then people start to get it. But until you do and you pull the veil, no one knows.
Yeah, we have actually, we have a really bad wolf problem here in Minnesota. And like, we had one season like in 2012, and now it's been nothing. And now they're talking about reopening it. I mean, these places I'm trapping beaver at, a lot of these homeowners or landowners, they got deer camps, and they're like, oh, deer camp used to be great until, all these wolves moved in, and they're like, oh, can you trap them? I'm like, no, but I said, as soon as they open a season up, I'm like, I certainly will. I would love to catch, I'd love a chance to catch a nice timber wolf around here. But yeah, we got big wolf problems around here, but they don't want to do nothing about it yet. So hopefully.
Do you have the same problem with coyotes in that area too, or is that a pretty low number?
Coyotes there's so many coyotes around. I mean, when I'm all beaver trapping, every single pond is just littered with coyote trails. And I got a bunch of coyote snares, and I keep telling myself that I'm gonna, I would skin some beaver and throw 4 or 5 beaver carcasses on the ice, and then I would throw some water on them so they'd all freeze together, and then I'd wait a week, and then I would go back, through all the cattail sloughs where all the beaver runs are at, and the coyotes would start to come in, and then I would hang snares, back on those trails, and that's how I used to get them. And I told myself I was going to start doing some coyote trapping again, but then it never materializes, good intentions.
Yeah, that's how it always goes. It's same with me. Now kind of thinking again back to like learning, like one of the things that I like to ask on this program, especially for people who are newer to trapping, can you recount, and we'll stick with beaver trapping for now, can you recount what your biggest mistake that you've ever made beaver trapping was?
Biggest mistake I've ever made beaver trapping. Oh gosh. I would say not necessarily like setting. It had nothing to do with setting traps. It was probably not identifying how dangerous beaver lodges can be in the wintertime around here.
How so?
So it could be February and 40 below zero here, and 10 inches of snow around these beaver lodges. And, I would, there, a lot of these, especially the shallower runs, there's absolutely no ice over these beaver runs. And I used to be kind of careless. I would just walk around, I'd walk around a beaver lodge, or if I found a spot, if I cut out a couple holes and I'm gonna set some traps, I would just walk around looking for sticks. And I almost died one time. I probably would have if a buddy of mine hadn't been there. I was just walking to grab a stick, and I went in up over my head, and it was like 20 below zero. And we were a quarter mile from the truck, and I got out. And
did you have waders on? Like,
I did have.
Fill up?
Yeah, I filled up. Oh, I filled up, and by the time we got to the truck, I had neoprene waders on. But the only thing that wasn't froze, was really my elbows and everything else. And I was so cold. I didn't have to go to the hospital, but I think I had the early onset of hypothermia because I couldn't quit shaking, and he had the heat on high and got me home, and it took hours for me to warm up. And, ever since that day, anytime I'm walking around a beaver lodge, I always have a spud bar in my hand. And if if I've identified that it's safe around the lodge, then it's okay. But I've taken a lot of people out trapping with me that don't, that I actually explain that to them, how thin the ice can be. And they didn't really get it until I walk over and it's like punching a chisel through a piece of paper, and then I go all the way down to the handlebar of the chisel. Well, it's 6 feet deep. And I'm like, because I've been like, oh, stop, and they're like, what's the big deal? And then you show them and they're like, wow, I had no idea that, it could be this dangerous. I've one time I warned some guys. I was trapping a beaver lodge, and they were driving around on their snowmobiles around this beaver lodge, and I stopped them, and I'm like, hey, don't come within 20 feet of the front. I said, there's no ice there, whatever, whatsoever. And they kind of heeded my warning, and I left, went and checked some traps, and I was back about an hour later, and they were all standing out there, and one of them would put a sled in front of that beaver lodge. I think they were just trying to, like,
Test it.
Yep, test it. But yeah, I think one of my biggest mistakes was not respecting how dangerous it can be around a beaver lodge.
Yeah, I think that goes for nature in general. Like, especially winter trapping, whether that's footholds, snares, like just the environment. Like today, pulling traps, like I sunk in up to my crotch in snow in a spot that I didn't think was that deep. Took a step and down. Didn't have snowshoes or anything with me. I'm like, well, it's going to be a pain in the butt, but just respecting it, I think, is great advice. Now, similar to like big mistakes you made trapping, which I think that's a good one. Just respect the environment. What about in the first shed? Do you remember any early on or even later in life mistakes that you've made in the first shed that have just cost you?
Gosh, not necessarily really. I do remember putting up muskrats and, and beaver and doing this and that. And I do remember my dad shunning me, for trying to skip over certain processes, like we used to cone the muskrats out, or I actually used to blow dry the beaver too with a brush, or leaving some moisture or something, on the hide somewhere and made it slip. You know what? That would be there. So there's one right there, especially muskrats, you can't leave a muskrat laying on its stomach on the floor for, and my dad would get on me. Hey, you gotta skin those rats, And one time I had like 20 some rats laying on the floor, and I left them all stomach down, and I went to skin them, like almost a day after what he wanted me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to pick one up and I put it in the thing, and I remember rubbing its belly, and all the fur came right off its stomach, and every single one of those muskrats were now ruined because, they got green bellies and the hair came out. That's probably the biggest, mistake I can recall, is making sure to, skin all your stuff on time or freeze it in a timely manner before it goes bad.
Yeah. And that goes back to the trapping, even if it's your full-time job, it is a full-time job.
It sure is. I mean, and you a lot of times sure you've had a long day, but there's certain things where you're like, now I'm like, okay, sure, I've had a long day, but I got to skin these beaver tonight, or it's just things you got to do, or else they're going to go bad. And then there goes the whole, the whole point of trapping,
I think that's, for me, coming out to the wilderness, learning to trap as an adult, learning to hunt as an adult, having grown up urban, I think that's, for me, what made it worthwhile was like, there's consequences. Like there's so much stuff in life today that you can just put off. If you respect wildlife and you respect, and I think most trappers do, what you're doing, like you have a responsibility, and that responsibility often goes till 2, 3 in the morning after a long full-time day job, and then checking your line and then doing the responsible thing, or, freezing it in a timely manner, whatever it is, but it takes time. And there's consequences, like you said, if you don't, which is waste, and you're wasting a life. And that's, if you are a good sport, it's sad. It's sad to see that. I'm sure you as a kid, or whenever that was that you had those rats get green bellies, like you probably didn't do it again.
No, I didn't. And I remember telling my dad about it, and, he didn't say anything to me. And that was probably the worst part. He didn't say, hey, dummy, or whatever. He just looked at me and like shook his head and, went upstairs. We used to process all of our fur in the basement of our house, where the water heater and stuff was. And that was our little fur shed. But yeah, he just shook his head and really didn't say nothing to me. And that was probably worst case scenario. I felt just horrible, and, and I didn't let that happen again. But I was, once again, like I said, I was just being lazy, and, being a kid, I guess. But, you learn your lessons. It's like the school of hard knocks.
Yeah. And if you're anything like me, you got to touch the stove more than once before you learn your lesson.
Yep.
But I think that might be universal too. Trappers are hard-headed, but, we do touch things more
We
than
do.
once, more than less.
Yeah, we like to test the boundaries.
So you have all this trapping experience. At what point in your life do you say, like, I want to film this? Because I want to get into kind of the YouTube stuff, because again, like, I came across you on YouTube. You were a mentor of mine when I started trapping, whether you knew it or not. It was well produced. It was set up in a real educational way, like the way you talk to the camera, the way that you set up your filming, the way that you talk about runs, talk about sets. Like, it's very educational. Like, I found it to be that way. Like, how did that happen? How did you land in YouTube land?
I one day, I can't remember, I wanted to watch some trapping videos. I thought about how I set traps, and so if you've watched a bunch of my videos, you'll notice that most people will put their 330 springs straight out and set them all in the runs like that. Well, my dad taught me to turn them sideways, run that stick through, and then you can hold the chain up here and you can set it as deep as you want in the runs. And people were like, oh, that's weird. That's not how you should set them. And I thought, God, I'm like, what? I wish I could see how these other people are setting traps. So I went on YouTube and typed in, beaver trapping, and there was a few videos, but the videos that I had seen at that point in time were, hey, we're gonna set a beaver trap on this beaver house over here, and it was like a long ways away, and I'm looking, and you can barely see what the guy's doing, and he's like, okay, the trap's set, and we're gonna come back tomorrow, and we come back and got a beaver. And I'm just like, man, if I'm somebody that wants to learn how to trap, why don't you explain, why you're there, or explain the run, or explain this and that. And I thought, I bet I could shoot, I said, I bet I could make a better trapping video, more educational, that people can learn from. And yeah, in fact, I think my first 70 or 75 videos on YouTube were all trapping. And I really like doing this. And then all of a sudden, summertime rolls around. Well, now I can't trap beaver anymore. So I'm gonna start shooting some fishing stuff, and now I got something to do, year round. And then people started commenting. They're like, hey, this is, really great. Or, like a lot of my inspiration comes from this dad messaged me one time, and I actually still have the screenshot on my phone. It's from like 9 or 10 years ago. He said, hey, I just want to let you know that, my son and I, never really got along, and we kind of came together and started watching your trapping stuff, and we've rebonded, through your platform, and I just want to thank you, and just hearing something like that from somebody makes you feel great. Like, oh my gosh, you're actually making a difference in people's lives. And, and well, and just them getting out and enjoying something that, it just, you and I know how we enjoy trapping, and then getting other people out, to have that same sensation of the outdoors is, I don't know, it's just amazing.
Yeah, that inspiration, and that's a perfect hat tip to your videos. And I think that's right. Like, you do a good job of blending education, know-how, and inspiration, to be like, you've never, in the videos that I've watched over the years, there's no gatekeeping. It's like, anybody can do this. Like, there's not some super secret thing to beaver trapping or any trapping. And, there's a lot of other folks in the trapping community I've seen where it is a little bit of gatekeeping. Like, no, not everybody can do this. Like, you can. Like, I'm a testament to that. Like, you can get into it, but it's hard to find the right education. I think you've hit that niche perfectly. And obviously the comments and some of that stuff has really proven that out, myself included, for you. Did you always have like a penchant for like camera and videography, or was that all net new to you? Like, what did you do when you said, hey, I want to build a better video? Like, did you just go buy like a DSLR camera? Was it a GoPro? Like, how did you even get started?
Actually, my my cell phone, like all my early videos are all shot with like a Galaxy S4, or an S 6 or 2. Like the first one, now, like now my phone, this is an S24. So if you think about that, every other year I'd buy a brand new phone I had the if you would have seen my setup, I literally made a tripod out of like 1x1s with wire, and I would wire my phone to it, and stick it in the snow or whatever. And then I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. I decided to go with the GoPro Hero Session, just that little square one, you plug into the back and now I mean, I still am really, about as simple as you can get. I have a GoPro Hero 11. Actually, here's my case. I shot a pan fishing video today and finished up some trapping videos. But yeah, I don't, you know what I mean? That's that's my box. I got my 11. But the biggest thing that upgrade that I think I've ever gotten are those wireless microphones, because so many people, I would be, the phone's right here, the camera's right here, and I'm trying to talk to people. But if I turn to do something, I can't as much, and people are like, hey, I can't hear you. So buying that, now you got that microphone right here. So even if I keep talking, you can hear me, clear as day. So it was little upgrades, but you get, I don't know, I mean, it's nerve-wracking to start doing that. Now everybody's like, oh, you're so natural in front of the camera. Well, I can do a podcast or I can shoot a video by myself, but if you were to take me, to like the Minnesota Trappers Association contacted me here a couple weeks ago to do a demo there this year in Wadena, and I haven't replied yet. I'm so good like this, nobody around. You put me in front of people, I start to sweat.
I can empathize with that, because it's all hard. Like, and that was going to be my next question, and I want to get to it, but I want to just touch on this is editing. Like it's time intensive to put together good quality content. It's hard to do a podcast where you have a good script where you can actually like narrate a story and get good stuff out of guests. All of that stuff is hard work, and it doesn't come, people see it when you have a solid product. They're like, wow, it's so natural, but they don't see like the script you're building. They don't see everything else you're doing on the editing floor, essentially, to make a good product.
Editing is the hardest part, I think. Most time consuming.
Oh yeah,
and it's easy to get burnt out. I usually get burnt out. Like this year, I didn't put up a video. The longest period I've ever went, I didn't put up a video for like 3 months. But it was all the YouTubers were losing their monetization to all these things, and there was everybody had the same common denominator. So when I upload my videos, they give you boxes to check, saying this is, do you swear in this? Is the content shocking? Well, I would always click the box saying that my content was shocking, but it was shocking for educational purposes. And all of my other YouTube buddies that uploaded, nobody ever checked these boxes, and I think that's the only reason that I never got nicked. But yeah, you get burnt out and need a little bit of a break, but it's tough. I mean, to stay motivated sometimes.
Yeah. Well, but going back to the Minnesota Trappers Association too, like I hope you go. And I was going to say, so I went down to Colorado, the Colorado Sportsman's Days, and did a demo there. And that was the first time that I'd done a demo. And again, similar to you put me in a room by myself with a camera, fine, all day long. You put me in front of a microphone, great. Make me write something, fantastic. But I was nervous when you've got, it was not a huge showing for my demo, but maybe 30 eyes, so 60 eyeballs on me. And I'm talking about something and I'm still relatively new, and I'm like, I question myself and my knowledge every day. And here I am trying to educate 60 eyeballs. Like, it was nerve-wracking, but it was fun. And like the conversations after the fact with people who were watching, then like, maybe the 5 or 6 out of those 30 that came up to me and were like, hey, let's talk more. That was worth it. But it was definitely a little bit of the armpit sweat for sure.
Yeah, even like I mean, I've been trapping forever, and I I'm like, gosh, what if I mess up, or what if, I'm doing, and then in my mind, I'm like, this is how I set traps. Everybody does it. Like, are they actually going to learn anything? I don't know. I sweat just thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I hope you do it, and I'm sure it would be fantastic. But I can't believe it. But we're already coming up on an hour, so I want to do like my lightning round questions that I ask everybody towards the end of the podcast. So, first lightning round question: what do you see as the future of trapping?
Oh gosh, what do I see as the future of trapping for myself, or just in general?
In general.
Um, you know, trapping's getting less popular. I feel like, there's always more and more anti people coming out, and I feel like at some point they're gonna start limiting us to, like, in a lot of states, to less sets. They tried to get rid of our diving set. 330s have to be half submerged. Well, now they're trying to get us, so they gotta be fully submerged. So I feel like at some point they're probably gonna take trapping away from us. I mean, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. But, and a lot of these people that are trying to take it away from us don't understand that, okay, you're going to take trapping away from you and I, that we, usually do for free. And now the problem is still there. So now, instead of doing it for free, now, I'm going to get whatever, they're going to be calling me, and now they're going to be, paying us taxpayer money to do the exact same thing. So I do feel like they're going to close in on us at some point. And like I said, it just doesn't make any sense, because the problem doesn't go away, and we're still going to have to be doing all this. And now, people are just going to have to pay for it,
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think that's a pretty resounding, commonly held belief of us, a lot of trappers. The walls are closing in a little bit, which is why it's good to join your associations and the people who are on the front lines fighting it. But second lightning round question: you're a gentleman who has been brought up in the woods and on lakes and on water and doing all sorts of stuff. What is the wildest experience you've ever had in the woods?
The wildest experience I've ever had in the woods. Oh gosh. About 9 years ago, I was, a while ago, 10, 12 years ago. So about 40 minutes away, we have a town called Holly, and then there's a swamp by it. It's called the Black Swamp. And there's a population of moose. I don't know what it is now, but there was at the time. And I was out there trapping some beaver, and it was raining out, and I didn't have neoprene waders on. I had just rubber waders at the time. And I'm walking around this brush, and I see something down in the grass, and I think it's a beaver, and I start walking down there, and it wasn't. I don't know if this cow moose had just had a baby or what the deal was, but she stood up and was staring at me, and she was only like 30 yards away. Well, I started turning around to walk, and she charged me. Well, there was a box elder tree that was like 40 yards away from me. And it's crazy because, one, it's pouring rain out. Two, this tree didn't have a single tree branch on it for like the first 10 feet. Somehow I hit that tree like a mountain climber, and I skivvied up that tree, and I was up there for like 45 minutes while this moose was around the tree. That was probably the scariest moment I've ever had beaver trapping. I've never been, almost trampled by a moose before. I've had a few wild ones. I got climbed by a beaver one time when I was setting a bank den. I was leaning back. It was a hole in the ice. I was leaning back to grab a stick, and the beaver came out, and it hit my legs, and it literally climbed me like a ladder and fell backwards on the ice with a big plop. And then it just literally took off running like down the shoreline.
That's not hilarious. That's wild. That answers the question on both fronts.
Oh, I had to go clean my pants after that one. I've had a few like wild encounters. Timber wolves. I've been stalked by a timber wolf before. I'd say that moose has to be the wildest one, where I was worried that I wasn't going to make her.
With a cap nearby, like that had to have been, like you said, like if there were no branches for the first 10 feet, like I'm sure that adrenaline shot you up that tree.
It had to. Like I said, rubber waders in the rain on a tree. I don't know how any other way I would have scaled that thing. You know, I must have been just clawing for my life.
Well, great answers on that one. So then last question, it's always a hypothetical. I think this is going to be a difficult one for you, but I'm interested in the answer. You have a choice now for the rest of your life, however long that is, hopefully a long time. You have to make a choice on whether you are going to be able to beaver trap or fish for the rest of your life. You can only have one over the other. You know, gun to your head or conibear to your crotch. Which one are you choosing?
At this point,
Don't be biased because of the name of the podcast. I want the honest answer.
No, at this point, I would probably pick fishing. You know, I've had a lot of good years of trapping, and I mean, like I said, I'm only 46, but you know, I've been working a landscaping irrigation job my entire life, and my body ain't what it used to be, shoulders, hips, all that. And I can only trap in the fall and winter, and I really enjoy, fishing. I get to do that year round. And I've really, I used to deer hunt a lot more too, and started deer hunting less and fishing a lot more. And I really enjoy fishing. I'm not gonna lie, I do enjoy trapping more, but being able to do it year round and having all the memories I have of trapping the way it is, I would probably have to pick fishing.
All right. Well, that's a fair answer, but we're already at an hour. And Scott, again, I sincerely appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. Excited to see you continue to make trapping videos as well. But for people listening, where can they find your YouTube channel? Like, what other social media do you have? Like, what else do you have out there that people can check out?
Sure. You can check me out on YouTube at 330 Maniac. I have Instagram, 330 Maniac Fishing, 330 and Maniac Guide Service. I opened up a guide service here recently. I did have a nice trapping channel on there, but kind of crazy. I posted some trapping pictures on there one day, and somebody messaged me and said, "Hey, if you post another trapping picture, I'm going to take away your Instagram account." And I thought they were joking. I put up a trapping picture. The next day, they deleted my Instagram account, and Instagram couldn't even help me get it back. Yeah. But beyond that, I'm also on Facebook. If you look me up on Facebook, I have 330 Maniac Outdoors on there. Other than that, yeah, we got Facebook and YouTube and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I add that to the show notes for people who are too lazy to type it in. They can go click that. But, for everybody listening, we'll catch you on another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. Thanks again, Scott.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.